I knew it was over the moment Tyler didn't make eye contact. That smug little MBA spawn, fresh off some LinkedIn certified ego trip, sat across from me like I was a quarterly expense report that needed trimming. He smelled like expensive cologne and ambition. His first words weren't hello or thanks for your service, but let's talk about alignment. Alignment. I'd spent 24 years at NextCore Technologies writing the very code that made their flagship product worth a damn. And now I was being aligned right out the door. He flipped open my review folder like it was a diner menu. "Look, Walt," he said, not even getting my name right, "you've done solid work. Really, but you've been here a long time. We need people who are agile, adaptable." He smiled that reptilian smile that never touches the eyes. "If you're not happy, the door's right there." It wasn't rage or sadness that hit me. What I felt was a bone-deep stillness. I looked at the team photo on my desk, 3 of those engineers I'd hired straight out of college. I remembered staying late with them through system crashes and botched deployments, running on vending machine coffee and determination. I remembered missing Riley's high school graduation because our main server cluster failed during a critical client rollout. I remembered fighting for them when upper management wanted to outsource everything to save a few bucks. Now this kid was handing me a participation trophy and a real termination folder. My name's Warren Brennan, by the way, 48 years old. Spent 6 years in the Navy working on shipboard computer systems before landing at what was then called Cortex Solutions back in 2000. Watched it grow from a scrappy startup operating out of a converted warehouse to a $400 million juggernaut. Most folks called me Walt. Those early days with Hal Brennan, no relation, just one of those coincidences, were something else. He was the kind of founder who understood that good code was like good carpentry. Measure twice, cut once, and build it to last. We'd work 16-hour days fueled by pizza and the kind of camaraderie you only get when everyone's betting their future on the same long shot. I was employee number 7, brought in to architect the prediction engine that would become our crown jewel. Hal used to say I had the best instincts for system design he'd ever seen. Warren thinks in decades, not quarters, he'd tell investors. Back then, that was a compliment. The algorithm I built in those early days wasn't flashy. It wasn't something you'd demo at tech conferences or write Medium articles about. It was solid, reliable infrastructure. The kind of code that runs quietly in the background while everyone else takes credit for the magic happening up front. 24 years later, it was still the beating heart of everything NextCore did. But Tyler Brooks didn't know any of that history. To him, I was just another legacy resource, corporate speak for old guy who costs too much and doesn't tweet enough about disrupting industries. The funny thing is, I saw it coming. Not the exact timing, but the direction. Tyler had been making moves against the older engineers for months. First, it was Rick Patterson from Database Architecture, 30 years with the company, pushed into early retirement with some nonsense about cultural fit. Then Linda Hayes from Security, forced out during a reorganization that somehow left her entire team reporting to Tyler's college buddy. Each time, it was the same playbook. Performance reviews that suddenly discovered problems that hadn't existed for decades. Vague language about adaptability and fresh perspectives. The kind of age discrimination that's perfectly legal as long as you never say the quiet part out loud. I'd even tried to warn Hal during one of his quarterly visits. He was spending most of his time at his lake house in Vermont by then, trusting Tyler and the board to handle day-to-day operations. "Watch yourself, Warren," he'd said, but his tone suggested he thought I was being paranoid. "Tyler's got his marching orders to modernize, but you're untouchable. You built this place. Turns out nobody's untouchable when quarterly earnings matter more than institutional knowledge." So I closed my laptop. No drama, no begging. I stood up, tucked the folder under my arm, and walked out. Past my team, past the glassy conference room full of people pretending not to notice. Past Patricia Williams from HR, the same woman who'd once asked me to help her nephew get into Navy tech training. Nobody said a word. That kind of silence has weight to it. Pulls everything down with it. But here's what nobody talks about. Sometimes silence is strategy. I didn't go home right away. Went to Murphy's Diner down the street, got myself black coffee and a moment to breathe. Not to cry or rage, just to think. See, I'd been planning for this day longer than Tyler Brooks had been out of business school. The Navy teaches you to think ahead. Plan for equipment failure, personnel changes, mission modifications. In the service, we called it operational readiness. In civilian life, I called it covering your ass. 24 years ago, when NextCore was still finding its footing and legal departments were more concerned with keeping the lights on than managing intellectual property, I'd made a decision that was about to change everything. Riley's MIT acceptance letter was still on my kitchen counter at home. $75,000 a year. My ex-wife Laura's divorce attorney had already called twice about the tuition guarantee in our divorce decree. Casey, my younger daughter, was a junior in high school, captain of the robotics team I'd been coaching for 3 years. Two smart kids with expensive futures, and I'd just lost the job I'd assumed would carry me to retirement. But I wasn't panicking. The Navy also taught me something else. Good intelligence beats overwhelming force every time. NextCore had been my whole life, but I wasn't naive about corporate loyalty. I'd seen too many good people get pushed aside when their experience became inconvenient. So in 2001, during one of CoreTech's many chaotic reshuffles, when our legal team was more focused on avoiding bankruptcy than cataloging intellectual property, I'd filed something that Tyler Brooks and his MBA brain had never bothered to investigate. I paid the check in cash, walked 2 blocks to clear my head, then caught a cab home. My townhouse smelled like coffee and sawdust from the workbench in the basement where I'd been building Casey a new robotics platform. I set Tyler's termination folder on the kitchen table, poured 2 fingers of bourbon, and opened a drawer I hadn't touched in years. Buried under tax returns and warranty cards was a slim manila envelope. No label, just the weight of foresight and 24 years of patience. Inside that manila envelope was the original provisional patent application. My name at the top. Not NextCore's, not Cortex. Mine. Filed in July 2001 during one of the company's many chaotic reshuffles when our legal team was more focused on staying solvent than managing intellectual property registrations. Leonard Rodriguez, an old Navy buddy who'd gone into intellectual property law after his service, had given me advice that seemed paranoid at the time. Walt, file it under your name first. You can always assign it to the company later once things stabilize. But if you file it under CoreTech and they go under, you lose everything. CoreTech never did go under, but they never got stable either. They just got bigger, greedier, and more forgetful about the details that mattered. The formal assignment of rights had always been in process. Temporary licensing agreements got extended, renewed, forgotten about. Nobody followed up because I was family, right? The loyal dog who'd never leave, never cause trouble, never ask uncomfortable questions about ownership and compensation. 24 years of we'll get that paperwork sorted next quarter. But buried in that original agreement was one clause Leonard had insisted on, written in language dry enough to put an insomniac to sleep. In the event of involuntary termination without cause, reversion of rights shall trigger automatically within 24 hours of formal notice. I'd forgotten about it myself until 3 months ago, when Tyler started his campaign against the older engineers. That's when I'd quietly pulled the file, dusted off the legal language, and realized I'd been sitting on a loaded gun for over 2 decades. My phone started buzzing around 7 that evening. Text messages from coworkers who'd heard the news through the corporate grapevine. Lisa Camden from QA, can't believe they let you go. This place won't be the same. Kyle Peterson, one of the summer interns I'd been mentoring, Mr. Brennan, is it true? Tyler said you decided to pursue other opportunities. Other opportunities. That was corporate speak for we threw him overboard, but let's pretend he jumped. I didn't reply to any of them. Let them wonder. Let Tyler spin his narrative about strategic realignments and fresh perspectives. In 24 hours, none of that would matter. Instead, I went down to my basement workshop. The smell of sawdust and machine oil usually calmed me, reminded me that some things in life were still built to last. I'd been working on a robotics platform for Casey's team. Nothing fancy, just solid engineering principles applied to a practical problem. Measure twice, cut once. Plan for failure modes. Build redundancy into critical systems. The same principles I'd applied to my career insurance policy. I found the old banker's box labeled Patent Archive, 2001, behind a stack of Casey's old science fair projects. Sat on the concrete floor like I was back on a destroyer's deck, sorting through maintenance logs during a rough crossing. Coffee-stained notebooks, early system diagrams drawn on napkins, printouts from computers that probably belonged in a museum now. My handwriting from 2001 looked like it belonged to a different person. Someone younger, more optimistic about corporate loyalty and long-term planning. But the legal documentation was solid. Leonard had done good work, even if we'd both assumed it would never matter. The sealed envelope with the original notary stamp was exactly where I'd left it, July 15th, 2001. Filed under Warren P. Brennan with provisional rights to the predictive algorithm that would eventually become NextCore's entire business model. Back then, I was just trying to protect my work. Cortec was a 10-person startup operating on venture capital fumes and pure determination. I didn't trust the chaos, didn't trust that my contributions would be remembered if things went sideways. The Navy had taught me to document everything, maintain chain of custody, cover your operational areas. Good thing, because Tyler Brooks represented everything I'd been afraid of. A manager who saw people as resources to be optimized, experience as dead weight, and institutional knowledge as something you could replace with a few Google searches and some fresh-faced enthusiasm. I walked back upstairs to my home office and opened the encrypted email account I used for legal and financial matters. Subject line, need you to confirm a clause. I scanned and attached the provisional filing, then hit send to Leonard's Oregon email address. My ex-wife called while I was waiting for his response. Laura and I had managed to stay on decent terms after the divorce 3 years ago. We'd both agreed the marriage had run its course, but we were still partners in raising 2 exceptional daughters. I heard from Riley, she said without preamble. She said something about you losing your job. Please tell me that's not true with her MIT tuition due in August. It's temporary, I said, which wasn't technically a lie. I'm working on a consulting arrangement with NextCore. Might actually be more lucrative long-term. Warren, don't bullshit me. Riley's scared and Casey's asking questions. If you can't cover tuition, we need to know now so we can figure out alternatives. That was Laura, always practical, always thinking 2 steps ahead. It's why our co-parenting worked even when our marriage didn't. Give me 48 hours, I said. I promise you the girls will be fine. Better than fine. She was quiet for a moment. You sound different. Calm. Usually when work gets stressful, you pace around the garage until 2 a.m. building something unnecessarily complicated. Maybe I already built what I needed. Leonard called back at 5:47 a.m. Oregon time. I was already up, had been since 4 a.m. going through system documentation and employment agreements. Old habits from Navy watch schedules. Walt? Jesus, I haven't looked at this language in 20 years. Papers rustling on his end, probably sitting at his kitchen table with coffee and reading glasses. Does the clause still stand? That's what I'm asking you. More rustling, yeah, it's still valid. And if they terminated you yesterday, pause, calculation, reversion triggered the moment you walked out that door. The algorithm belongs to you now. Legally, officially, completely. I felt something settle in my chest. Not relief exactly, more like the satisfaction of watching a long-term plan come together. How long do I have before they figure it out? Depends how good their legal team is at monitoring USPTO filings. Could be hours, could be days. But Walt, once this hits their radar, they're going to panic. That algorithm is their entire product line. I know, what are you planning to do? I looked out the window at the sunrise, painting the sky orange and gold. Collect what I'm owed. By 6:07 a.m., I was logged into the USPTO filing system with my morning coffee steaming beside the keyboard. The reversion confirmation was a template Leonard and I had drafted years ago as a just-in-case measure, back when Cortec was still hosting all-hands meetings in borrowed conference rooms and nobody thought to worry about intellectual property edge cases. The form was straightforward. No dramatic legal language, just bureaucratic checkboxes and digital timestamps. Involuntary termination without cause, check. Automatic reversion clause activated, check. Upload supporting documentation, verify electronic signature, submit. 1 click, that's all it took. Ownership of NextCore's crown jewel. The predictive algorithm that powered their flagship product, their government contracts, their entire investor pitch deck, reverted back to Warren P. Brennan at 6:09 a.m. on a Tuesday morning while I sat in my kitchen wearing yesterday's clothes and drinking coffee from a mug Casey had made in middle school pottery class. The USPTO confirmation email arrived at 7:23 a.m. Official federal documentation that the patent Tyler Brooks thought belonged to his company now legally belonged to the guy he'd fired for being inflexible. I leaned back in my chair and let the quiet wash over me. Not the silence of defeat, but the calm that comes from watching a long-term strategy finally pay off. My cat wandered into the kitchen and meowed at her empty food dish, completely unimpressed by the multi-million-dollar intellectual property transfer that had just occurred at my dining room table. Smart cat. Meanwhile, across town at NextCore headquarters, Tyler was probably arriving early to prep for the quarterly product review. He'd spent the last 3 weeks putting together a presentation about their next-generation predictive platform, the same algorithm I'd written in my basement during the Clinton administration, just wrapped in fancier user interfaces and marketing buzzwords. The beautiful irony was that Tyler had accelerated the product timeline. Instead of the usual 6-month development cycle, he'd push the team to deliver a public demo in 3 weeks. Strike while the iron is hot, he'd told the engineering team. Show the market we're moving fast and breaking things. Well, he'd certainly broken something. My phone started buzzing around 8 a.m. Text from Lisa. Warren, are you okay? Tyler's been asking weird questions about your old projects. Another from Kyle. Mr. Brennan, something's happening. Tyler called an emergency meeting with legal. I didn't respond. Let them figure it out themselves. Instead, I started drafting something more interesting than a resume. Licensing terms. The beauty of intellectual property law is its simplicity. Either you own something or you don't. Either you have permission to use it or you don't. NextCore had been operating under an informal handshake agreement for 24 years, assuming their loyal old engineer would never cause trouble. Assumptions can be expensive. I spent the morning researching comparable licensing deals in the tech industry. Similar algorithms, similar market applications, similar revenue streams. By lunch, I had a framework. 8-figure annual licensing fee, retroactive to my termination date, plus royalties on any new implementations. Generous terms, really. They could keep using my work. They'd just pay market rate instead of taking it for free. The first crack appeared Tuesday afternoon. Kyle Peterson, the intern assigned to monitor USPTO activity for competitive intelligence, was running routine searches when he plugged in NextCore's own patent numbers and saw an unexpected name. I can imagine his face going pale, mouse cursor hovering over the refresh button like maybe reality was just having a technical glitch. But federal databases don't have glitches about ownership changes. They just have facts. Inventor and owner. Warren P. Brennan, status active. Last updated today. Kyle did what any smart intern does when they discover their employer might be in serious legal trouble. He documented everything and forwarded it up the chain with a subject line that probably read, urgent, possible IP issue. The email landed on Patricia Williams' desk in legal around 2 p.m. Patricia, who'd started in HR and moved to legal when NextCore needed someone to handle routine contract reviews. She was competent at standard employment issues, but had never dealt with major intellectual property disputes. She read Kyle's email twice, then pulled up the USPTO filing herself. Same information, same impossible truth staring back at her from an official government website. Then she did something that showed she was smarter than Tyler gave her credit for. She dug through the archived employment agreements until she found mine. All 37 pages of it, including the provisional patent clause buried in Section 12, Subsection 4, Paragraph C. In the event of involuntary termination without cause, reversion of rights shall trigger automatically within 24 hours. Patricia printed everything: the USPTO filing, the employment agreement, the patent documentation. Then she walked to Tyler's corner office where he was practicing his presentation for the Friday demo. I wasn't there, but I heard about it from 3 different sources within hours. Corporate gossip travels faster than network packets in a place like NextCore. Tyler was mid-sentence about revolutionary predictive capabilities when Patricia knocked. She entered with a manila folder, set it on his glass desk, and said 4 words that probably gave him an aneurysm. We have a problem. Tyler's first instinct was damage control. Is this about the Brennan termination? Because I've already documented the performance issues, Tyler. Patricia's voice cut through his bluster. Warren owns the algorithm. Silence. The kind that has weight and gravity and pulls everything else down with it. That's impossible. We've always owned that code. No, we haven't. We licensed it, and the license just expired. She opened the folder, spread the documents across his desk like evidence at a crime scene. USPTO filing, employment agreement, patent documentation, a paper trail that stretched back to when Tyler was still in elementary school. How long do we have? Tyler asked, and for the first time since I'd known him, his voice sounded smaller. The public demo is in 3 days. If we proceed without authorization, it's willful patent infringement. Triple damages. Tyler stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language, which in a way they were, the language of consequences he'd never bothered to learn. Fix it, he said finally. Offer him money, equity, whatever it takes. Patricia gathered up the documents. That's assuming he wants to negotiate. I was having lunch at Murphy's Diner when my phone rang. Hal Brennan, calling from his Vermont lake house with a voice like aged whiskey and accumulated wisdom. Warren, he said, and I could hear disappointment threaded through every syllable. I just got a very interesting call from our legal department. Hal, I said, stirring sugar into my coffee while the diner hummed around me. Long time. The USPTO says you own patent 79,864,322. I let that statement hang in the air like smoke from old cigarettes. Is this some kind of mistake? No mistake. Silence on his end. The kind that comes from a man recalculating 24 years of assumptions in real time. Warren, you assigned that to us. Back in the early days, no, Hal, we talked about assignment. We drafted agreements. Legal said they'd formalize everything after Series A funding came through. Then legal got restructured, priorities shifted, and somehow it never happened. I could hear him breathing slower now, processing implications. That algorithm is the core of everything we do. I know, why now? I watched through the diner window as office workers hurried past with their briefcases and productivity anxiety, none of them aware that the corporate world they inhabited was built on assumptions that could crumble with a single USPTO filing. Because your people terminated me without cause yesterday. The reversion clause we wrote in 2001 just activated. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, Jesus Christ, Warren, you kept that clause active for 23 years. I'm a careful man, Hal. The Navy taught me to plan for equipment failure. 20 minutes later, Hal was reportedly storming into Next Corps headquarters like a force of nature in expensive casual wear. No appointment, no warning. Just the founder arriving unannounced with printed USPTO documents and the expression of a man watching his life's work implode in slow motion. He didn't go to Tyler first. Smart move. He went straight to Patricia in legal, slammed the patent filing on her desk, and asked one question. Did we ever finalize the IP transfer for Brennan's algorithm? When Patricia confirmed what she'd already told Tyler, that 24 years of handshake agreements meant nothing in federal court, Hal closed his eyes and stood perfectly still for 10 seconds. Then he walked to Tyler's office for a conversation that emptied the hallway within minutes. You didn't just fire him, witnesses heard Hal say, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd built empires from circuit boards and determination. You destroyed the legal foundation of this company because you were too arrogant to check what you were breaking. Tyler tried his usual deflection about performance metrics and strategic realignments, but Hal wasn't interested in corporate doublespeak. He built this place, Tyler. The algorithm you've been taking credit for, Warren wrote that in his basement 24 years ago, and now he owns it again because you couldn't be bothered to treat people with basic respect. The public demo was scheduled for Friday morning, 48 hours to figure out how to present a product they no longer had the right to use, or cancel an event that had already cost them 6 figures in venue rental and catering. Tyler chose option 3, pretend the problem didn't exist and hope it resolved itself. By Thursday evening, I was sitting in my home office reviewing licensing proposals from 3 different IP attorneys when my doorbell rang. Tyler Brooks stood on my front porch in a wrinkled suit, looking like a man who'd discovered his parachute was actually a backpack. Mr. Brennan, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I invited him in, offered coffee. He declined both the coffee and the chair, choosing to stand in my living room like a salesman who knew he was about to get thrown out. The patent situation, he said. Our legal team thinks it might be a filing error, some kind of clerical glitch. I sipped my coffee and waited. What I'm proposing is a clean slate. You come back to Next Corps, we'll call yesterday a miscommunication and we can work out the IP details properly this time. What kind of position were you thinking? Senior architect. Significant raise, stock options, recognition for your contributions. I set down my mug and looked at Tyler, really looked at him. 20-something MBA with soft hands and a LinkedIn profile full of buzzwords about innovation and disruption. The kind of manager who thought experience was a liability and wisdom was just accumulated stubbornness. Tyler, yesterday you told me I was inflexible and resistant to change. Today you're offering me a promotion. Which assessment was accurate? He shifted his weight from one expensive shoe to the other. People make mistakes under pressure. No, I said quietly. You made a mistake. One mistake with very expensive consequences. I walked to my desk and picked up the licensing agreement my attorney had finalized that afternoon. Here's what's going to happen. Next Corps will license the algorithm from me. 8-figure annual fee, retroactive to my termination date. You keep using my code, I get paid what it's worth. Tyler went pale. 8 figures. That's more than most employees make in a lifetime. I'm not an employee anymore. I'm the owner of intellectual property that generates hundreds of millions in revenue. You want to use it? Pay market rate. He tried negotiating, explaining cash flow constraints and quarterly earnings expectations. I listened politely, then handed him the licensing agreement. These are the terms, non-negotiable. You have until market open Monday to sign, or I start shopping the license to your competitors. Tyler left without the coffee or the handshake. Friday's demo was canceled with 6 hours' notice. Technical difficulties requiring additional development time according to the press release. Stock price dropped 12% in after-hours trading. Monday morning, Patricia Williams arrived at my house with signed licensing agreements and a certified check for the retroactive payments. We concluded our business on my front porch in less than 10 minutes. "What about Tyler?" I asked as she packed up the paperwork. Patricia allowed herself a small smile. "Mr. Brooks is exploring other opportunities." That afternoon, I drove to Casey's high school to watch her robotics team compete in the state championship. They won first place using a platform I'd helped them design. Solid engineering principles applied to a practical problem built to perform under pressure. After the ceremony, Casey ran over with her trophy and a grin that reminded me why I'd spent 24 years playing the long game. "Dad, this is amazing. MIT is going to love this on my application." MIT Riley was starting there in the fall, fully funded. Casey would probably follow in 2 years. 2 brilliant daughters with unlimited futures, and I no longer had to worry about tuition payments or divorce decree obligations. Sometimes patience isn't just a virtue, it's strategy. That evening, I called Leonard in Oregon to thank him for advice that had seemed paranoid 2 decades ago but turned out to be the smartest career insurance policy I'd ever bought. "You know what the best part is?" I told him. "Every time someone uses NextCore's flagship product now, there's a line in the credits that reads, 'Core algorithm developed by Warren P. Brennan.' 24 years late, but there it is. Some of us don't burn bridges when we leave. We just collect the tolls we were always owed."